Eurasian Times, 24th of March 2024, examining the Indian general's resistance against China's PLA, Arunachal Pradesh in 1987, an account of a salami-slicing by Beijing. However, Indian Army Chief General Krishnaswamy Sundarji delivered the most robust response to China's endeavor to salami-slice Arunachal Pradesh in 1986. Under the alias Sundarji, he was a highly accomplished, ambitious, and contentious commander of the Indian Army. During his 2-year term, he oversaw the intervention of the Indian Peacekeeping Force in the Sri Lankan civil conflict. He was instrumental in coordinating Operation Brasstacks, the largest war games ever held on the Indian subcontinent. The thinking general, who enjoyed liquor, is also credited with establishing a mechanized infantry regiment, thereby modernizing the Indian Army. The media's profile of him read, he possessed the flamboyance and showmanship of Patton, the determination and conceptual vision of Rommel, the stubbornness and ego of Churchill, the ambitious hawkishness of MacArthur, and the manipulative abilities of a politician. The profile's purpose was to demonstrate the potency of the potion. The mission that brought out his mastery as a strategist was Operation Falcon from 1986 to 1987. In 1986-87, Chinese troops occupied Sundarji in the Tawang district of Arunachal Pradesh, inspired by their victory over India in 1962. The vicinity bordering Sundarji has been designated as the summer residence of the subsidiary Intelligence Bureau of India and has been cleared for storage during the winter months. An Indian patrol discovered the Chinese erecting permanent structures in June 1986. When the Indian forces confronted the Chinese, an additional 200 Chinese personnel materialized on the scene. By August, the Chinese had constructed a helipad. The region was north of the limits of patrolling established for Indian forces, however, the Chinese claimed it. Additionally, the vicinity was near the Namkachu Valley, where the Indian forces suffered an ignominious defeat in 1962 at the hands of the People's Liberation Army, PLA. Major General J.M. Jimmy Singh, the divisional commander of the 5th Mountain Division of the Indian Army at the time, notified 4 Corps Commander General N.S. Narahari, who personally informed Sundarji of the developing circumstances and encouraged him to inspect the region personally. According to military history, Air Vice Marshal Arjun Subramanyam, retired, Sundarji traveled to Tawang to assess the situation. Jimmy informed Sundarji that Tawang's current position rendered it incapable of defense. Except for an operational track leading to Bumla, no roads beyond Tawang compromised the Indian defenses. When Jimmy proposed adopting a forward stance in the Zimitang sector, Sundarji replied, "Who is impeding your progress? Why are you not proceeding?" Sundarji interposed in response to Jimmy's assertion that he required 1,200 mules to sustain his troops and that it would take several months to establish positions. "Why are we discussing mules in this day and age? Let us discuss helicopters." This laid the groundwork for Operation Falcon, a meticulously executed mountain operation. Instead of approving Chinese aggression with submission, General Sundarji initiated a power struggle. With the assistance of Air Chief Marshal Denis Lafontaine, the then Chief of the Indian Air Force, he was granted access to the recently procured Russian Mi-17 medium-lift helicopters and the aging Mi-8s. Furthermore, the recently integrated Mi-26s were utilized. The Zimitang sector was supplied with a brigade via airlift, and helipads were built there. The construction of drop zones served to resupply the soldiers. Ammunition stocks, mortars, and artillery weapons were airlifted. Heli-lifted into position was the recently acquired 155mm Bofors medium regiment. Attainment by Falcon. As India's political leadership acquiesced to Chinese aggression, General Sundarji devised a proactive deterrence strategy. Implementing this approach necessitated allocating sufficient military personnel and firepower to dissuade China from carrying out its threats. Rapid logistical preparations accompanied the deployment to ensure the soldiers were not cut off. On October 8, 1986, an infantry battalion of the Indian Army commenced Operation Falcon while occupying Lungerla. The Indian Army mounted a series of aggressive patrols. The China Study Group, which received backing from the Ministry of External Affairs, MEA, of India, regarded the Army's aggressive posture with skepticism. During the MEA's efforts to negotiate with the Chinese, The PLA attempted to occupy an unnamed rocky feature that overlooked the Lungurla in November 1986. A young Indian officer commanding a platoon occupied this feature through a daring display of rock climbing before the Chinese could arrive. The Chinese were subsequently relegated to the lower reaches of the Sundarji Valley, writes AVM Subramanyam in his book Full Spectrum, India's Wars, 1972-2020. Another battalion was transferred by the Indian Army to occupy Hathungla Ridge, which provided a view of the Namkachu Valley and was where its outposts were eradicated in 1962. A separate infantry battalion obstructed the approaches from the south to the fabrication of helipads from galvanized corrugated iron panels in a single day. The Mi-17s transported the dismantled artillery guns, mortars, and ammunition stockpiles. An additional battalion was requested to occupy the western entrances to Tawang. November, at the onset of winter, a challenging operation was conducted to occupy features .4811 and .4907 at an altitude of approximately 16,000 feet. The Indian Army approached the Rinpoche, chief cleric, of the Tawang monastery for assistance in convincing each family in Tawang to contribute 3 members towards constructing the maintenance lifeline. The resilient Monpas, indigenous occupants, traversed rugged terrain and severe winters for more than a month to transport loads to .4907. They operated and lived by faith, declining Jimmy's offer of snow boots and high-altitude clothing because it would deprive combatants of their protective equipment. AVM Subramanyam writes, "They were the unsung heroes of Operation Falcon, and Jimmy had to convince them to accept payment for their services once the crisis subsided." The Chinese responded to India's unexpected move with a counter-aggressive buildup. The Chinese threatened a 1962 recurrence, while the West foresaw conflict in the Himalayas. Advisors to former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi characterized Sundarji as irresponsible. However, the general maintained his stance, instructing a senior Rajiv associate, "If you believe you are not receiving sufficient professional advice, please make alternative arrangements." The Chinese retreated because the Indian forces had established a strong foothold in their positions by the spring of 1987. Indian troops were positioned at an elevated elevation overlooking China. The function of the IF in Operation Falcon. As the only helicopter pilot to ascend to IF Chief, Air Chief Marshal Fali Homi Major, retired, recalls how the force maintained detachment into Tawang-assisted Operation Falcon. Initially, each pilot in the unit worked an average of 100 hours per month. One positive aspect was that my pilots were immediately war-inoculated in virtually warlike operations on a new type following induction, he wrote in the book. Since the 1962 war, the India-China disputed boundary, also known as the 3,488-kilometer LAC, China estimates it to be around 2,000 kilometers long, has been essentially tranquil. However, since the 2017 Doklam confrontation, tensions have been simmering along the frontier, and relations between the two nations have been strained. China's unilateral efforts to alter the status quo along the disputed boundary have caused concern in India. 20 Indian soldiers were killed when Chinese aggression escalated violently in Galwan 33 years later, an incident that the Indian forces would later emulate by emulating Operation Falcon. China has amassed a substantial presence in the PLA. Galwan was a significant factor in the outbreak of the 1962 Sino-Indian War. Troops remained entrenched in their respective factions throughout 2020. On their Chinese side, the Chinese had erected more than 80 tents. The Indian armed forces immediately entered the fray and initiated combat. Its complete fleet of transport aircraft, including C-130s and C-17s, was deployed. China was outwitted as it airlifted 68,000 personnel, 330 infantry vehicles, and over 90 tanks and artillery guns. Jimmy, who subsequently attained the rank of lieutenant general, summarized the operation as follows: Operation Falcon's objectives were to strengthen defensive positions, prevent intrusion, and assert our claim on the McMahon Line while maintaining a forward position in the Tawang sector. The likelihood of a war with China increased.